Assalamu alaikum. I'm Dustin Cron, the founder of the Center for Global Muslim Life, and we're live here today with our brother Ovidio Salazar to talk about his film Taha Abdurrahman, the Philosopher of Renewal. This is our third weekend. We have a very packed weekend. We have 5 screenings this weekend with film, all kinds of different films. From this film, this documentary, beautiful documentary about philosophy and Sufism, to a love story that's coming up, Finding Fatima at the end of the weekend, and a session with the Indonesian movie star Hana al-Rashid on Sunday as well. And we also, on Saturday, then we have our Ramadan Digital Media Awards coming up on Sunday as well. We want to first recognize everything that's happening in the world and affirm emphatically that, of course, Black Lives Matter, and that we love people all around the world. That's what this film festival is about breaking down the barriers and borders in our hearts and in our minds and connecting each other through our stories. We also want to recognize that this land that I stand on in San Diego is Kumeyaay land, and it's important that we recognize the lands that we stand on in the United States as stolen lands, and that justice should be done in our world and in this country. But of course, this film talks about that the revolution isn't possible without true revolutions of ourselves and transformations of ourselves to build a better world. We want to also thank our sponsors, Penny Appeal UK, Penny Appeal USA, Penny Appeal Worldwide. This film festival would not have been possible without your support. We also want to thank the Amana Mutual Funds Trust for your support as a community sponsor, and the American Muslim Community Foundation. Thank you. This is what we hope is the first year. And next we'll bring in our brother Ovidio. So Ovidio Salazar is from California and has been involved in documentary films for 20 years. After studying theater and performance art in Los Angeles and New York, his interest in Sufism took him to Europe and the Middle East. He studied Arabic and Islamic studies in England and Egypt. And for 2 years, he produced the BBC series Faces of Islam and has filmed the Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca on several occasions. Welcome. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
Yeah, thank you
very much. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's a real honor to have you. Within my own journey to Islam, your film on Imam Ghazali was a big opening for me, and it was also an opening for me to see what's possible in terms of telling stories about philosophers, telling stories about spirituality. And so we want to dive into this, but into that work, on all of your work. But first, let's start with this film about Taha Abdurrahman.
Yes.
It's a really fascinating film. Like, how do you tell let's start with, how do you tell a story about philosophy? How do you tell a cool story about philosophy? It seems like one of the most difficult things to tell a story about philosophy and ideas. So if you could start there.
Yes. Well, I could give you some background into how I conceived the idea came because I was invited to Morocco to participate in this film by a Moroccan production company, Sky Media. And they had a contract with Al Jazeera to produce a film. And so it was originally their idea. I didn't know the work of Taha Abdurrahman at the time that I was invited to to direct this, and I didn't know. I didn't have a single idea, and I just kind of started laterally thinking, how can I make a film about philosophy? You know, because film is, as you know, a visual medium, and philosophy tends to be abstract. So you have to conceive of ideas in a visual context, how you can translate that. And as well, not knowing who Taha Abdurrahman was, I was in a quandary. I mean, how about if I got down there and I found his philosophy didn't tally with my own understanding, my own world vision? And it would have been a very difficult thing to have done, because, you know, first of all, any project that you approach, you really, the first requirement is passion. I feel that you really need to be able to put your heart and soul into it. So I had a few meetings with him. I met him initially, and delightful man, and so I got to know his thought, his thinking, his thought processes, and what his world vision was. And so we recorded an interview with him, and then we went back and I digested it and thought about it. And then luckily the producer that I had working, that I was working for, and I was staying in his living room in Tangier overlooking the harbor. Every morning I would, almost as if after Fajr, I would contemplate, I would stay in my room invoking and really coming up, letting the images percolate through and bubble up, and see what, you know, how I could each day come up with something that I felt would be putting together a bit more of the puzzle. So there you go. I mean, it was that process of organically evolving the idea of the film.
But let's go a little bit deeper there. So let's talk about film as a spiritual process then for you. What is the process for you in making a film? Where, you know, how do you connect the dots to make something that has great spiritual meaning through the visual medium?
Well, thank you. Well, look, I think with anything, you like I said, you have to start, first of all, letting the thoughts come up, arise. I mean, you know, out of inspiration. And so that's kind of the lateral thinking, the kind of getting the vertical dimension sorted out, so that you don't try and establish anything too critically. You know, you just allow the inspiration to flow. And then, you know, there's the other side of things, the practicality. What's your budget? How can you film that? How can you shoot that? And then, you know, you have to you have to work within the constraints that you have available to you. So in terms of a film, obviously, you know, it's easier to film conflict. Let's be honest. You know, where things take place on, you know, where there's struggle and things like that, you know, that you can easily interpret visually. Whereas something of an ephemeral nature, spiritual subjects, it presents a whole different challenge. And what you don't want to do is fall into the trap of over sentimentalizing something. So you're working, you know, you're trying to find expressions for abstract ideas, and that is the challenge, you know, coming up with the images. And I found, you know, it's a journey, obviously, both metaphorically and as a narrative arc, so that you're in anything you do, there's a kind of putting together the beginning, the middle, and the end, and finding ways of keeping the attention of the viewer, you know, so that you establish rhythm and counterpoint and ways of actually, yes, enhancing the viewing experience through techniques of film, and it's grammar.
Yeah, and so for those who haven't seen the film yet, you can register for it at our website, and we'll send you the link to the film. globalmuslimlife.com. If you just go to the film festival page, you can sign up at the top of the page, and we'll send you the link. But one of the things that's fascinating to me is the way that you dramatized his life, and you start when he's a young boy sitting with his father. And so does that come from your theater background, the way that you create these dramatizations? Most documentaries, of course, don't have the dramatic pieces in it. It's mostly, especially now, we see almost exclusively B-roll in historical dramas. We see it's a lot of voiceover where you decided to go. There's some B-roll in this film when you're talking about 1968, but primarily it's in the scenes that you dramatize. Can you talk about how you create a scene like that and why you decided to use that technique for this film?
Yes. Well, all right. So as I said, we conducted 2 interviews, and I was trying to avoid having to actually show him in the interview. Like you would have the interview and then you would have B-roll. But what I wanted to try and avoid was by integrating the entire film as one sort of hermetically sealed film, as it were, that I would be able to then go between his memories and his recollections and his philosophy. So, and between the past and the present. So I had I framed it around the first public lecture that he gave to introduce him in a kind of oblique way, so you don't know where the film is going at that point. And yes, so after I recorded the interviews, you start to create the structure or the narrative thread that will guide you, so that you have a kind of way into the film, and then it was more or less chronological to begin with, because I wanted to show how Dr. Taha Abdurrahman's philosophy evolved, because he, as he points out, he didn't start out as a philosopher, but that was something that came about as a crisis that occurred. I mean, to do with the situation of the Arab world in the 60s, 73, no, 60s, yeah. So even earlier. So yes, so my background is in theater. I trained as an actor in California, but then once I had started my quest and became a Muslim, I sort of put that to the side, and then went on my travels, and then began my career actually in Cairo, Egypt, working for a NBC News. But then that led to working for a British documentary team, and then that sort of allowed me, sort of to be introduced, to be initiated, as it were, into the profession. That was in my late 20s. So I wanted to use always drama, because I always thought, we're missing a trick here, because, like you say, the documentaries that rely mainly on B-roll or this, they are able to convey the facts of things, or sort of the situation, but to get under the skin of your subject is something that I've always thought, well, look, this will add this other dimension. And it can be done badly or well, depending on how it goes. I mean, but that's what you strive to do the best you can within the limitations of your budget, and it's a craft, yeah.
And then can you talk a bit about the actors in the film? Were those professional actors, or did you, especially the young people there's a lot of youth in the film actors. So can you talk about working with them? How did you find them? Again, you're working with small budgets here.
Well, absolutely. The thing is when you set out to make a documentary or anything for that matter, it starts with your intention. So I felt our intention was noble, and you cast your wants onto the universe, and somehow you hope at that point, because you don't know that you're going to get the right setting or the right locations or the right people. And luckily, I formed a very, very good relationship with my producer, who inherently trusted my vision and my judgment, and so there was very little dispute. But so casting like the main actor that plays Taha Abdurrahman as a young man, that was entirely fortuitous. Because first of all, when I said, really, I want to introduce drama into this documentary, they said, all right, we'll do it. And we should have a casting session. But I just thought, well, look, let's go for a coffee and let's, discuss this. And so we go down to the cafe, and then I right away, I spy a young man. I said, this guy could actually play the part of Taha Abdurrahman. Let's go up and ask him. Go see if he's had any acting experience. And my producer was sort of slightly shy, and he said, but I've never done anything like that. I can't just go up off the street and ask. I said, go. I just have this feeling. And he goes up there, and I see the man's expression change from, shock and surprise to glee. And he comes back and he says, absolutely. I've been studying theater now for a couple of years. In fact, my father's favorite author is Taha Abdurrahman. We're from the Qadri family. And so everything lined up on almost, there was a cosmic alignment. And it's often that way that I find people, but it's a search, it's really, it starts with the intention, but it's a search, and you've got to just look at the physiognomy of people. The little boy in the film, those were like relatives of Taha Abdurrahman.
MashaAllah. So you're just finding people in the cafe.
Yeah, and then the fellow that played Ibn Arabi, he was working with, and I just, he had very striking eyes and that, but I wasn't sure if he would be willing to shave his beard, because, Ibn Arabi, when he first meets Averroes, Ibn Rushd, he's what he described himself as a beardless youth, but he was up for it, so he was game.
Yeah.
So that's how it works. Yeah.
MashaAllah, yeah, that's super fascinating. And the film, to me, it reminds me of Sheikh Amadou Kane's book, The Ambiguous Adventure. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's a classic piece of West African literature in the French language. It's been read around the world, and it's one of my favorite books. I highly recommend everyone reads it, because it's this common theme of how the French colonized. And so the young boy in the book is the first generation to not go to the Quran school, but instead to go to the French schools. And so in this film, similarly, Taha Abdurrahman is talking about that experience of his father actually refusing the French in closing his Quran school. And so it's this incredible, rupture. And then he gets to the moment where he's studying at the Sorbonne in France. It's the great protests that are filling the street of 1968, a moment, not dissimilar to our own. And then he reflects upon that the true revolution, we can change things externally, but if we don't change internally, the systems will just replicate themselves. And so I think that the way that you showed all of that through this line of thought into his development of his rational thinking and Sufism, and then his relation to Ibn Arabi is super fascinating. And I think so can you talk about how you connect that group of thoughts in the film?
Well, so this was just the logical extension, of his own development, of how he, I basically got him to tell us his journey, what brought him to the point of becoming a philosopher, and so obviously these very dramatic events were unfolding throughout his life and in his lifetime, and so how they impacted on him. I thought, well, these are the major turning points in his life. So obviously that is what I wanted to record, and I wanted to get I mean, I didn't know how I would do it, but and then I discovered, they had some footage of the father, on 8mm, home cinema. And so I thought, well, I could use that, because it's not just enough to just get him to talk about it. You have to find the images to correspond that makes it a film, or I feel.
And you said so to make this hour-long documentary that's very engaging and very beautiful, you said you had only 2 interviews and then the 1 public lecture that you filmed, and then basically everything else is all dramatized, correct?
That is right, yes. I spent some afternoons with him, of him wandering the streets of Al Jadida, but yeah, I mean, that's what I did. And then it really took about 4 months or so to put the film together. A lot of constructing ideas around it, and then lining up the setting up the dramas, and finding the props and finding the locations. And so it was quite a bit of, like, when you go off, when you're hunting, what we used to have these things when we were children, where you'd have to go and find a 4-leaf clover or something like this, and you would gather them up, and hunt, whatever that was.
MashaAllah. Yeah, and I think what's important about the film also, and even your film about Ghazali also as well, is really, how do we tell stories about our thinkers from the Islamic world who are challenging this totalitarian, I would call it, westernized worldview? And so we need more of these films. And so, of course, if there's people out there that want to support them, we encourage you to support them. There's so many of these stories that aren't told about our thinkers. And so let's go. I want to take a step back. Then let's start with your journey as a filmmaker and as a Muslim. You began on it, but could you go a little bit deeper? Talk about how you started the series that you worked on at the BBC, and then how you started making your own films. And maybe you could give us a few of the titles that you worked on, including the number of times that you filmed the Hajj.
Yes. So as I mentioned, so I began sort of traveling. I went and lived in Turkey. I met my wife, and then we moved to Jerusalem, and then followed for a few months. But then after that, we ended up in Cairo, in Egypt, trying to study Arabic. So I positioned myself as someone who kind of knew Arabic. I didn't know it very, very comprehensively. I was trying to consolidate it, but it was enough to get sort of a coffee and things like that. So this crew came in from London, and I more or less blagged my way on to the shoot. But at that point, I rose to the occasion and did my best to kind of organize everything. And I worked as the local fixer, and I conducted the translations for the interviews. And, it was a real steep learning curve, but I excelled, I felt, and they did as well, because they then sent me to Pakistan to continue it, and I filmed with them there. And then when I got back to London, this is in 1980 or so, I couldn't work here because there are very stringent union restrictions. So unless you belong to the film union and television, you couldn't get a job. Unfortunately. So it was at that point that some people I knew were starting some people who had converted to Islam. They were starting a company called News Afro-Asian Service, and they were going to Saudi Arabia to film the Hajj. And so they invited me along, and that was the first time I went, 1980, to work as a researcher on a film about the Mutawaf, the pilgrim guides. And then I started going to Saudi Arabia on a regular basis, filming the Hajj for various institutions. It wasn't broadcast at that point. It was more to do with, like the Hajj Research Center. So there were studies that were conducted, but I was all this time gaining background, skills in all aspects of filmmaking. So as a production manager, as a researcher, then as an assistant director. And then in the mid 80s or late 80s, like 86 or something, there was an extension to the Prophet's Mosque in Medina that was taking place under the Saudi bin Laden group. And my friends got the contract to do that. So this was a major undertaking that involved, filming, documenting it for over a period of about 7 or 8 years. And it was all shot on cinema film, 35 mil cinema. And in fact, we rarely, I don't think we used video in those days. It was all shot, mostly everything we shot was still on film, which is a real luxury and wonderful. But it also helped you to master your craft. I mean, the skill that is involved in working with film cameras is a different proposition to trying to making your films just with the digital media today. So anyway, so I worked on the extension to the Prophet's Mosque in Medina and the Holy Haram in Mecca over a number of years. And when that project came to an end, I started working, making advertisements and commercials, as well as continuing some industrial work. But at that point, I'm figuring, well, look, I've really got stories to tell, and I don't see anyone doing them, and so I got my first films off the ground. One, a surfing film, because I was going back to my youth in California, and I very much had a story that was close to my heart that I wanted to tell. But again, when I started to find my style, my way of filming, it wasn't as straightforward as a documentary, because again, like you rightly point out, I try and use as much drama, or at least have it so that it's not just a very classic documentary style. It does involve drama. So that's what happened. Then I was invited, after I made the surfing film. Well, then I went off and made some films for the BBC Natural History Unit, which was really nice, because there you're learning about the culture of filmmaking and television in the United Kingdom. But then I started working for this series called Faces of Islam for the BBC. And then that led to going back for the BBC to make a film about the pilgrimage to Mecca. So I took a group of British Muslims, and that was successful. Alhamdulillah, it was viewed by millions of people, and winning a couple of awards. So then that's basically it. From then on, I started either making films, sort of specializing in, using my background, having become a Muslim, and using that as my sort of establishing a niche as a filmmaker. And then yes, I've subsequently filmed the Hajj on maybe 13 occasions or something like this.
Yeah, we want to get more into we want to go also into the Imam Ghazali film, but I really want to ask you one last question about that. How I can't imagine a more difficult shoot than the Hajj. Can you talk about what's involved in shooting something like the Hajj, the technical difficulties of it that go into something like that, and then where can people see any of that work anywhere? Yes.
Well, look, it's probably the most difficult thing as a filmmaker you can imagine, because there you've got 2 million plus people all trying to be in the same place at the same time. And it really, if you don't you know, have your ducks lined up, you're going to miss it. You're going to miss it, you know, because the physical difficulties are you cannot imagine. I mean, you know, so if you're, say, you have to be somewhere at 5 o'clock, you have to set out at 3:30 to get there, or even if it's a 20-minute journey. So just from that point of view, then, you know, the permissions and people not understanding, you know, you just find it, you know, and also in the heat of summer when it gets up to 50 degrees centigrade, you know, it's quite it's physically a challenge more than anything.
Yeah, I could see, I can't even imagine.
Yeah, we've also filmed the IMAX, where we had a crew of 70 people. So
What's the name of that film?
It's called Journey to Mecca, I think, or it's.
Yeah, that's right.
We were the second unit. We were the ones filming the actual Hajj in location with big 70mm cameras, I mean, IMAX cameras that had just come off the Batman shoot, and you know, then it was Ibn Battuta and his journey to Mecca.
Oh, okay.
They were called The Greatest Journey, I think. The Greatest Journey.
Yeah, those are really beautiful films. So let's talk about the Imam Ghazali film. Of course, it's probably one of you're best known for that film. Can you talk about that film, what it meant for you to take on such a big, beloved subject, and kind of how the film has been, what people think about the film around the world?
So again, that film originated when Abdul Hakim Murad, Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad, T.J. Winter, came to me and suggested I make a film on Imam Ghazali, because up until that point, I found him quite terrifying. I mean, you know, he's so exacting and so, you know, such a remarkable thinker, and you know, everything is done in a way of that you're having to remember Allah. So I said, yes, fine. So I did some research and I put together some ideas, and then we got together the initial budget. And again, you know, I thought, well, look, we could film in Syria, which is where he spent time in seclusion, or we could go to, you know, various places. But I thought ultimately he's from Tus in Khorasan in Iran. So I thought, well, look, this is where we really have to film, in Iran. So unfortunately, you know, it took ages and ages. I wrote to the consulate and tried to contact the cultural attaché, and had very little luck with that. And finally, again, I met someone who was a filmmaker from Iran, who had very good connections and was aligned with the government. And he said, I'll see what we can do. So again, the journey took a couple of years before I was able to get the permissions to go there. But once we were there, it was the most delightful place, the most receptive, the most incredibly wonderful experience of filmmaking that I could have imagined. And at first, the film was going to be more or less, you know, people, lots of talking heads, and then, you know, abstract shots of him wandering and pondering and like that, more or less as background. But when I got there, I saw the caliber of the acting and the technicians, and, you know, these are on the world stage some of the greatest, you know, people you could imagine that are producing films there. So I said, really, we've got to really think about this script and start to develop it. And I had a very good script writer, by the way, and he had tried to extract the dramatic scenes from the Munqidh min al-Dalal, from Ghazali's own autobiography, his spiritual autobiography, A Deliverance from Error. And that was, again, because that was so lucid and so graphic, that we could extract those scenes that would give the philosophy a kind of a form. And so we went there, and yes, again, the process of finding the actors and meeting wonderful, like the art director had worked with Majid Majidi on things, and very talented cameraman, and so on and so forth. And yes, I have to say it was one of the most exciting things, and it was challenging, obviously, because there you've got a crew, and I didn't really have much Farsi at that time, and then to decide to shoot it in the Persian language, you know, so I relied on you know, my assistant directors and the people around me. I mean, it's just my son and one line producer, and everyone else was from Iran that worked on that.
And I think you said in a previous conversation that we had that Iran has some of the most talented filmmakers in the world. Can you talk more about the Iranian film community?
Well, you know, they are somehow, you know, you have to say the traditions of the illuminationists, the painters and things, that has carried forth, and the way they can interpret these stories through their visuals, through the miniatures, and then somehow they've managed to really, you know, craft some remarkable films, and some and many of them, you know, again, highly spiritual, working within the constraints or the limitations of various things, like not large budgets, but still being able to craft remarkable stories and just spellbinding. So yeah, I think they're acknowledged as some of the best in terms of world cinema, you know, in art house cinema, that, you know, that everyone wants to see.
And then let's go back to the Ghazali film. So then how was the film received around the world? And I think one of the things that we're talking about here with the Global Muslim Film Festival is that we need more films that represent the true beauty of Islam. I remember, you know, when I found the film, it was early in my own journey. I converted almost 20 years ago now, but it was in the early days of YouTube. I would find a link that would be up for a little while, and I watched the film that way before we were able to find it on DVD. But this distribution point is so important. Can you talk about some of the difficulties of, even though how great that film is, still the difficulty of finding distribution, the languages it's been translated into, and if you have, you know, plans to translate it into any more languages?
Well, thank you. Look, the film, like, we need films. We need films that are not afraid to discuss these subjects and to go into these characters who are part of our heritage as Muslims, of world heritage. So the stories are universal in that sense. And Ghazali is obviously one of those whose major influence, you know, the story needed to be told. So once we'd made the film, well, first of all, we set out to show it in festivals, and so there were some in that specifically aimed at spirituality and religion. So it was it's been played in a number of festivals worldwide, I have to say, and won a few awards. And then we actually have a company called Matt Media Productions, and we distributed it on DVD back in the day, and maybe even video, but no, I think just DVD. So that was the main thing. But then obviously, you know, everyone wants to see it, and unfortunately, you know, I know people aren't as careful regarding other people's copyrights and things like that. I can't begrudge them, because, you know, I want people to see the film. It's no good making a film and no one watches it. So we've done our best to set up a distribution company as well, Zamzam Distribution. So obviously the model has changed in the last 20 years, whereas before, you know, now you've got streaming platforms, and alhamdulillah that the Taha Abdurrahman film was able to be screened tonight and for the next couple of days on your platform. But we were able to have it translated into French. I think it was in Russia because it also screened in Kazan International Film Festival. It's called the Golden Mimbar, which is a Muslim film festival in Kazan, Tatarstan. And it was translated into French. Unfortunately, as far as I know, not a Spanish translation. And I think that's a shame because, you know, there are many Spanish Muslims. And I didn't make the film just for Muslims, to be honest, but people that would appreciate it. And fortunately, I mean, what I would say is that it's gotten into the curriculums of the curricula of universities, so that I think around I've often approached by university professors and teachers who have, and lecturers who said, oh, you know, we show the Ghazali film every year in our class, and it makes me very happy. So it would be nice though to be able to continue making other films of this nature, but it requires patronage in the end of the day. You know, you need people that will support your efforts.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we need patrons, and we need patrons for this work to tell the beautiful stories. And a reminder, something I've said many times during this film festival, is that if we don't tell our own stories, if we don't have our own patrons, the stories that are being told about Muslims fit into two primary categories, and that's the Islamophobic category, and that's the westernized, very average Muslim category, the liberalized Muslim. Whereas what we're featuring in this festival has to do with the beauty and the spiritual essence of our faith and who we are as Muslims and as people. So with that in mind, you know, we're going to dive into this more next week when we have a conversation with you and Harun Sugic and some other friends of ours about spirituality in film. Can you talk about, I think that to me is such an important conversation, but it's one that's not had. How do you convey the spiritual in films? And can you also talk about some of your, you know, film influences when you think about spirituality in film?
Very good. Look, I mean, there is this, it's a very small number of people, I think, to my mind, over the years that have produced films that, you know, that go on you say the numinous, or the, in a way, the sort of the undefined realms of, you know, the unseen, you could say, even. People like Andrei Tarkovsky, for example. You know, these are art house films. I guess they're world cinema films. Tarkovsky. I mean, some of Jodorowsky, you know, they're quite abstract and weird, but I know he is appealing to people, at least of a mystical persuasion. And who else? I mean, obviously, Majid Majidi, I think, is one of those people who addresses issues to do with Islamic spirituality in a very succinct and very beautiful and life-affirming way. And, you know, those are the, maybe even Terrence Malick, you could say. You know, he's not everybody's cup of tea, but I certainly appreciate his work, and he's striving, and he's someone who's come out of a philosophical background. And so again, his vision is one based on ideas. You know, it's again, so you're competing with the commercial aspect of things as well, or you're trying to balance it out. You're trying to make films that are accessible, and let's face it, spirituality, yes, it's within everyone's need, but not everyone recognizes that. You know, so. But I think that's why I like the ideals that you're projecting for your film festival, the Global Muslim Film Festival, to first of all show the diversity and the wide range of thinking within Islam, and then to go deeper into these aspects. But yes, I'm trying right now. I've been working on a script on the relationship between Rumi, Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi, and Shamsi Tabriz, because it's not the obvious sort of subject. I know other people have attempted it in the past to try and, or they've spoken about making films on Rumi, because he's because he's universal and he's one of the most recognized Muslims, and somehow, there's this saying that he's the most widely read poet, translated poet in America. And so these are the kinds of figures that I'm trying to sort of work on and make films about, and aspects of that, so that people, again, they get the exposure. It's not just Homeland or whatever, it's not just the negative portrayals that's so prevalent in the Western media.
Exactly. No, thank you again for your time. And wanted to, so you mentioned the Rumi film. Do you have any other projects coming up that you wanted to talk about? And also let everyone know where they can find you online, where they can find your work, where they can watch your different films.
Well, look, as I said, I've been working on the script on Rumi I had two other script writers over the years. I mean, this is a very long-term project. But as I said, everything begins with an intention, and I've been working on my own on it for maybe 3 or 4 years, and I feel I've started to understand what it's really about at last. So let's hope, inshallah, Baha'u'llah, I can get once this situation, vis-a-vis the world, kind of straightens out. Let's hope that we're able to take it to the next step. And in the meantime, I've been working on a couple of short film ideas. And short films, just to kind of hone my skills as a script writer. And one, again, is based on a story from the Masnavi, which you might be people in the might be familiar with, which is the man who tries to outrun death. And when it's his appointed time, and he bumps into Azrael, the angel of death, in the marketplace, and then he goes to see Solomon, and Solomon spirits him away on the wind to Hindustan, and then the angel of death says, "Well, where is he?" And he says, "Why were you looking so angrily at him?" And he said, "Well, it wasn't anger. This was total astonishment. How could he be here when my appointment with him is in, Hindustan?" So I've kind of given it a kind of more contemporary, as well as a sort of I've transposed it into the setting of Mexico. Hopefully, I can make that film. And then some other ideas that are, well, inshallah, they will go. I don't want to say too much right now about them, though, because many a slip twixt cup and lip, and I'm hoping if they go, you'll know about them.
Yeah, may Allah continue to give you tawfiq and success, and bless you in all of these projects. We really need your work in our world. All of your film work is very beautiful. Do you want to tell people where they can find your website, where they can find?
Well, our website's matmedia.org. So probably www.matmedia, MATMEDIA. It originated out of the Muslim Academic Trust media. So that would be the first port of call. And I think that website's still active.
And then I think the Ghazali film is streaming on Alchemia in the U.S. at least.
Yes. We should say that. Yes. And some of my other films, I did a film on the late Dr. Martin Lings. He called Circling the House of God, which is about his pilgrimage from 1948, which again, yes, it's streaming on Alchemia. And I think I was very happy with that film, and you'll get to see Dr. Martin Lings, and I think that would be a very good film for people to watch.
That brings up another question, which is that So that film has incredible footage of the Hajj in it from what I think is like 1958, right?
Well, it's a number of periods. It's even earlier. And because I've been making films on I've been making films for the Saudis on various aspects. I've done a fair amount of archive research, and I've employed archive researchers who specialize in digging out from obscure places footage. So we were able to find footage from various periods, from a French film, from Egyptian films, various periods, and then put that together after, again, just one interview.
Yeah, that's one aspect we haven't talked a lot about, but it's super important, especially with film, is the preservation aspect. Are there any film libraries that you know of anywhere in the Muslim world that are specializing in preserving some of this footage, or is it all just kind of disappearing?
This is from the British Film Institute, the BFI. That a lot of that was, but also no, I don't think. To my knowledge, it's not being. Maybe in Lebanon, I could be mistaken, but no, I don't think the tradition has been to preserve it in the way, not as of yet, but unless I'm mistaken, I don't want to, but to my knowledge, we don't have people that are conservationist and preserving film in the way that's being carried out here in the United Kingdom and in France.
Maybe just institutions, right? Like there's in Berkeley, we have the Berkeley Film Archive, really amazing university institution that preserves film from around the world. And, these are the types of things that we have to develop. Otherwise, that history will just disappear. And this film is very fragile, and a lot of these places are very hot. Even like we featured some films earlier in the festival that haven't, some of these even recent classics haven't been preserved or updated to even digital forms, unfortunately.
No, it's a real. It will be a tragedy if future generations are denied this kind of access to these images and these stories. And we're doing our best, in our own humble way. We're all trying to pull together to create this narrative to sort of balance things out, at least.
Yeah, and like my teacher Imam Zaid Shakir always says, this is a marathon, and our spiritual ancestors have passed us the baton. And the question is, what are each of us doing with that baton? It's very clear, mashallah, that you're running with it, and you're leaving an amazing legacy, especially for filmmakers. And so again, we thank you for all of your work. We hope that like I said, continued success in what you're doing.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me. I just wanted to say, I'm very, admittedly, it was originally, the Taha Abdurrahman film was made for an Arabic audience, Arabic speaking audience. So the subtitles, I would have liked to have spent a bit more time on them and to have corrected some of the faulty translation. But inshallah, ba'ala, we'll have an opportunity of screening it again and correcting those mistakes and the errata.
Inshallah. Like I said, the films, most of our films are available on our YouTube channel. That film is not. It's on our Vimeo page. I can send people the link if you register at our website, Center for Global Muslim Life, globalmuslimlife.com, and go into the film festival, and we'll send it to you. So thank you again, Ovidio. It's been an honor to be with you. Inshallah, we're all together in each other's presence someday soon, and that Allah lifts this great calamity that the earth is facing right now.
Amen. And thank everyone who's tuned in tonight to listen to this, and I wish them health and and safety. And amana.
And we'll be back with you again next week for the Spirituality and Film panel, and we look forward to having you then. Okay.
Barakallahu fikum. Thank you for the opportunity. Good night.
Yeah.